I bet that you will be not a little surprised, if not absolutely staggered and alarmed, to learn that there is no mandatory requirement in the UK for meat to be labelled as stunned or non-stunned when it's sold to you in the supermarkets. Now, obviously, you can understand what I'm saying here. I have to jump around the algorithm a little bit, otherwise the video will get flagged. But I've done a video about this before on the halal meat and preparation of animals for consumption, and whether it's right or wrong, whether there should be an exemption and so on. I think there really needs to be a sensible sort of modern grown-up discussion about this, because on the one hand, there are exemptions for religious practice, and on the other hand, there is the straightforward animals shouldn't suffer just because we want to eat them argument. Now, as I mentioned, this will be alarming to you, probably, but we are here on the Chinese cooking channel, so please do subscribe here. I'm helping out on the Dear Wife's channel here, but this is where food and law cross over. This is my expertise. I do cook occasionally, so I'll do some more cooking videos here as well. But let's jump to this first, because this is from the Food Standards Agency. Now, I was absolutely alarmed to learn this. It might surprise you that this is not my specialist legal area. Not to say that it's wrong, because there's always someone in the comments that says, hi, you shouldn't be talking about it if it's not your specialist area. But you know what? I can read, and when I read it, I understand it. So it doesn't matter it's my specialist area or not. It's all here plain as day to look at. And actually, as a point in trivia, a lot of a lawyer's training is not just memorizing the law. We're not an encyclopedia, but it's knowing where to look as to what the law is. And in this case, this is a regulatory body for food, the Food Standards Agency. And it says, black and white, in reverse order of the highlighted bits on screen here, quote, there is no mandatory requirement for meat to be labelled as stunned or non-stunned, but we will continue to liaise closely with DEFRA and Welsh Government on method of production labelling and any other work related to non-stun slaughter. Now, I'm going to give you my personal opinion here. You can agree with it or disagree with it. And obviously, if you're of a religious following, I mean, no insult, but my personal view is that we should not be putting our religious faith and belief before the welfare of animals. I think it should all be stunned, no exceptions whatsoever. And even when it comes to the actual preparation, I'm jumping around the algorithm a little bit for words here. I'm not going to tell you what happens and how it's done. If you really are inclined, you can go and look it up yourself. I would just warn you, don't look at videos, because two reasons. One, you're going to get probably the worst videos from people that are trying to give you the worst possible opinion of such things. And they are likely to be the most sort of outrageous, and they will pop to the top, and they'll be what you see. And it will give you, not only are they horrendous for you to watch, but it will also give you a somewhat warped view of what really happens, because the vast, vast majority of it is not like that. I dealt with that sort of misconception in the previous video on this channel, or one of the previous videos on this channel. So without explaining exactly what it is to you, I think we should put animals first. That is my personal view. You can agree with it or disagree with it. Let me know in the comments what you think. But the Food Standards Agency here, ironically, then says at the top highlighted bit, animal welfare legislation permits non-stun slaughter and aims to respect religious freedoms. Now, there's a sort of, in my personal view here, there's a contradiction in terms here. We cannot really be looking at animal welfare in the same sentence as do whatever you like because it's a religious freedom. I respect those religious freedoms. I just personally think we should put animal welfare above that. And if we really follow a faith and we should respect all creatures, etc., I think we should put animal welfare first. But that's not the point of this video. You can agree and disagree with those personal opinions and whatever. But I think the real point of it is this. Let me just allay some fears for a moment and say that a 2024 survey data analysis by the Food Standards Agency, 97% of poultry were stunned first, 85% of red meat animals were stunned, and this drops to sheep being the sort of worst treated here. Only 71% of sheep were stunned prior. This means that a lot, we're talking 500,000 a week by their data, are not stunned beforehand. And personally, I think that is a staggering number. And this has caught the attention and the concern of the RSPCA here, who calls, in my view, rightly, for an end to non-stun methods. They say they are on the rise in the UK, and that is probably obviously because of a rise in demand and therefore a rise in the statistics and the percentages, because a percentage is always that. The bigger something is overall, the larger the numbers that what was a small percentage represent. So the RSPCA here says that non-stun has risen for both halal and sheketer meat, which with a 20.9% increase in non-stun halal and a 2% increase in kosher. They say, we are disappointed to see that the numbers of animals are without pre-stunning has risen since the figures were last reported 2 years ago. And they say this is a real concern, as based on predictions, this means over 500,000 animals a week without stunning. He said, we've long campaigned to bring an end to non-stun and would like to see a change in the law which would protect the welfare of millions of farmed animals. Now, the thing is, this is a supply chain, and this is where everybody in the supply chain sort of bears some responsibility, and that includes, dare I say it, you. So, we cannot be overly hypocritical here. And apart from the vegetarians among you watching, you're probably not watching by now, but unless you're vegetarian, then, or vegan, of course, then we cannot be too hypocritical if we are consumers of meat. But this is where the real point for this video comes in that I really strongly believe we should, at the very, very least, be given proper choice. And that is where we have Rupert Lowe sort of spearheading this. Back in March, he posed a question and said, he asked the Secretary of State for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs if he'll introduce mandatory labelling on meat products to indicate whether animals were stunned prior or not. And the answer was that the government encourages the highest standards of animal welfare and would prefer all animals be stunned before. But we respect the rights of Jews and Muslims to eat meat prepared in accordance with their religious beliefs. And again, my personal view is I respect all faiths, all religions, all practices, but my personal view is that we should put animals' welfare ahead of that, because that's just what I think. At the very, very least, if we're going to consume these animals, the very least we can do is ensure that they don't suffer. Now, again, my caveat and my explanation in the previous video, the vast majority are stunned, and they are done in a way that people generally believe is not suffering. But as I said, the statistics are staggering and alarming, to the tune of 500,000 a week. This really is quite poor, I think, as a society. I think it's quite poor that we allow that to happen. This goes on. It is for religious authorities to decide if the meat is halal or kosher. A significant proportion of halal meat comes from animals that are stunned beforehand. I dealt with that in my previous video. However, and here's the problem, and this is, people often ask me, as a law, when I was a law student, one of the questions is, if there was a law that you could change, what would it be? And at the time, I didn't think of this. It wasn't at the forefront of my mind. I didn't read about it. I'm now, much more widely read on different areas, what is and is not law. If I'd have guessed at the time, I would have said, of course it should be labelled. Of course you should be told. Of course it should be clear. Of course it should be mandatory that things are labelled as to this is how this happened. But I found that it's not. And so if I were asked that question today, what is the one law that you would change if you could change? It would be this. As again referenced here, there are no regulations. I can't believe that this is the case, but this is where we are. There are no regulations that require labeling of meat to include the method of slaughter. But where any information of this nature is provided, it must be accurate and must not be misleading to the consumer. But I would then say, is not, as the old saying goes, is not a lie of omission still a lie? Thus is the omission of a fact still misleading? So if the method is not on there, it's just not on there at all. Is that not misleading generally to the consumer? As a lawyer, I think it is. I think if they don't tell you a prominent fact, a really important fact, I think that is misleading. And I think that is what should be changed. Nonetheless, there are no regulations that require this is so. The government respects religious freedoms and expects the industry, whether the food producer or the food outlet, to provide consumers with all the information they need to make informed choices. This was the answer given in Parliament. Now, there is a consultation on proposals to improve and extend the current mandatory method of production labelling, as was undertaken last year by the previous government. The consultation sought views on options for the production standards behind the label. We're now carefully considering all responses before deciding next steps, etc. Now, I would say quite definitively that one, as a consumer, cannot possibly make an informed choice unless all of this information is provided at the point of purchase, or at the very least with a code that if one were so inclined, one can go and look up. But even then, I think that is a step too far. I think if you have to, because this is where it hit the media just recently, with lots of people publishing photographs of labels in supermarkets. And then there is a code, I believe, on every packet of meat, which tells you which house it came from. And you can look up that house and what type of house that is. And obviously I'm omitting words for the algorithm. But you can look up what kind of house that is and how it's prepared and whether it's stunned, non-stunned and whatever. And the information is sort of there, I think, in most cases. But to me, that is not absolutely open and transparent unless it tells you on the packet, this is where it was produced, this is how it was produced, and this is the information you need as a consumer to be fully informed. I personally do not think you can possibly be fully informed unless you have all of this information. And now this is not a new thing either, because we can go way back to 2014 when this again was discussed. This is straight from the House of Commons Library, and the preparation of halal and kosher meat. And again, the issue of animal welfare, stunning, non-stunning. And again, it was acknowledged so many years ago that there is currently no overall legal requirement at EU or UK level to indicate the method on meat labels, nor are there specific regulations governing the sale and labelling of halal and kosher meat. However, if meat is labelled as such, it must not mislead the consumer. It goes on. Bearing in mind this was 2014, the major supermarkets and a number of food outlets already provide information on their websites about their practices on halal and kosher meat and wider animal welfare. Many of them now, and I think since this article, many of them now do have designated sections, but that is not to say the other sections are not as such, and so may not be labelled, and so may be misleading. And they say they've got a representative body, which is considering an assurance scheme. And again, even though more than a decade ago we have, the government has said that it wants consumers to be able to make an informed choice about the food they buy, and will review its options on the matter after publication of the EU Commission study on the methods labelling, and which is due that summer, over a decade ago. So this is not a new conversation. This is not a new thing. It's not a new debate. It's not a new principle. The laws are the same, nothing's changed. And so when I say law takes time to change and all of this stuff really just gets swept aside when there's a bit of a fuss about it, people talk about it, then it's brushed aside again and on we go. And it's one of those things that unless it actually physically affects you, and it's one of these things, the people that know don't care and the people that care don't know, it's one of these situations where unless you actively know about it, then you just go about your business. Because I presume, and I think I'd be right in saying that the vast majority of people go to a supermarket. If you're vegetarian or vegan, obviously you don't go anywhere in the meat aisle, so it doesn't concern you, unless obviously you're, taking an issue with it and you're protesting about it and you're raising awareness about it. But for the vast majority of the meat eaters among you, I presume you go to the meat aisle. Let me know in the comments if this is you, if you've never really thought about this before. If you go to the meat aisle, you want chicken or you want steak or you want fish or you want this or you want that, and you go, you buy those things. You probably don't look at the label as to where it came from. Much of it comes from abroad. And again, we might have the similar problems with the labels in that it doesn't tell you everything you might need to know. But for the vast majority of you, I suspect you don't actually look at where it comes from. You don't actually consider which sort of house that it comes from. You don't really consider whether it's stun, non-stun or whatever. Let me know in the comments. I think some of you probably have in recent years, but not actually got anywhere with the information, not found out what you need to know. And I think some of you now will go look for it. You'll probably hit the same stumbling blocks and struggle to find the information, and you may not actually find out enough to make what I would call an informed choice. So if you did have an informed choice, if let's say you went to an aisle and you saw a packet of meat and it said this was produced in this way, particularly if it was non-stun, I suspect a lot of you just wouldn't buy it. And I think a lot of you, if it was produced, even if it was stun, but it was a religious preparation, I think a lot of you quite possibly would just not buy it. Let me know in the comments what you think. I mean, of course, I think a lot of you possibly would think, well, as I've said, we can't be too hypocritical because if we consume it, we can't be too critical of how it's produced and so on. But I don't take that argument. I mean, that is an argument, but I don't take that. I think whilst on the one hand, we are, those of us who are meat eaters, we are consuming meat, I think at the very least, we should still have animal welfare in mind. This is an ongoing debate. It's an ongoing discussion. But the law as it is hasn't changed. You may ask yourself why the law hasn't changed. The only answer to that is that it hasn't been brought into Parliament. It hasn't been supported to the degree that it's gone all the way through and changed the law. And as I say, if there's one area of law that I think should be changed, it should be this. At the very, very least, every single packet should have a very clear label. This is where it was produced. This is how it was produced, and whether it is or is not in any kind of religious practice, because some of you may agree or disagree, but I think at the very least you should know. And if we were to go even further, I know a lot of people would campaign to eliminate all kind of religious preparation altogether because of the nature of it and so forth. But this is where the battle between religious freedoms and animal welfare comes in. Again, that's a matter of subjective assessment. To some degree, it's an objective one as well. But let me know in the comments what you think, which side of this you fall. I value your input. I value your feedback. And as always, thank you so much for watching.